Much. European leaders rejected a multi-billion-dollar euro bailout for Eastern Europe despite warnings from Hungary that the rejection could lead to an economic iron curtain across the continent. Will the global economic crisis tear the European Union apart? Here's Neil Ferguson. He's the author of the book, The Ascent of Money. Neil, you know what? Americans, I think, are looking at this whole thing where, oh, well, it's George Bush's fault. Well, it's Barack Obama's fault. They have no idea what is going on outside of our borders because our media is doing such a horrible job at reporting it. The rest of the world is on fire, right?
I agree, Glenn. In fact, the situation in the United States is significantly better than the situation in most of the rest of the world. It's terrible in Asia. Japan is absolutely down the tank. And in the situation in the European Union is getting worse by the day. And if only Americans would look around the world, they would see that bad though their situation is, it's better than almost everybody else's.
All right. So I'm reading the papers and I'm seeing all of these, in the UK they're calling for a, what do they call it, summer of rage. I'm seeing that they are setting in Germany, they are setting BMWs and Porsches on fire. There are big, huge rallies going on and civil disobedience all across Europe. And now, for instance, if I'm not mistaken, explain this to me, Germany is pretty okay compared to some of the other countries, and they're saying, you know what, we're not throwing good money after bad. We know that we won't, no matter how much money we throw at these other countries, we're not going to be able to bail them out, so we'd rather keep our money ourselves. And that's the real problem, right?
Yeah, the French have a phrase for this, sauve qui peut, which translates as every man for himself. Right now, the 27 members of the European Union are pulling in opposite directions, and the ones that have got money, Germany in particular, are extremely reluctant to hand it over to the ones that have got a huge hole in their finances, particularly the East Europeans. The Hungarians came along and said, please bail us out, oh, and by the way, bail out all the other East European and Central European countries. And the Germans took one look at this and said flatly no. That's quite unusual, Glenn, because for most of the history of the European Union, ever since its beginning in the 1950s, the Germans have been writing the checks to the poorer European countries. That's in fact how European integration used to work. The Germans paid for it. But I think the magnitude of this crisis is such that the German Chancellor Angela Merkel is essentially not prepared to carry on with the German finance gravy train, which spells trouble for the whole process.
Let me tell you, let me just take a ADD moment here just a second, Neil. I think America, you need to listen to this story because I think there's a possibility this is exactly what happens to America. When you have California goes down, New York goes down, and people in the rest of the country is like, wait a minute, we're not all in debt, and if we bail out these states, we won't have anything left. I think you're going to have the same kind of thing where you've got states, which is exactly what the European Union is, states saying, I want no part of this. So, Neil, how does this thing work itself out? Do you think that are we headed for some sort of a Cold War, or are we looking, do you think the EU is going to dissolve over this?
I don't think it's going to dissolve, but I think there are two big differences you have to bear in mind, Glenn, between the US and the European Union. One is there is no European-wide... Well, you don't suck, right? But there are others also. They don't play baseball and they don't do American football. However, they are much better at soccer than you are, so be careful. The critical difference here is that there is no European-wide treasury. If a massive economic crisis comes along and hits the United States, the U.S. Treasury is there to spend vast quantities of taxpayers' money in advance in order to do something about it. You've been covering this well. This doesn't happen in Europe because there's no EU-wide treasury. Each national government, all 27, has its own treasury and makes its own spending decisions. The other big difference is that there is a European currency, the euro, but not all the members of the European Union are part of that single currency. And so there's an enormous difference between being inside the eurozone and being outside it. The problem the Hungarians have is they're outside it with their own currency still. So are the Poles. So are most of the East Europeans. And their currencies are falling off a cliff at the moment, and they're desperate to try and get into the eurozone before they take any more pain.
So, Neil, we've got about a minute here left. And Gordon Brown is coming to America tomorrow, which I can't wait. And he's talking about a new global New Deal. That the solution here is just to have a big global New Deal. This is going to be a nightmare. The idea that we can pull each other out of this